The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation and a grant from Hills Brothers Coffee Incorporated.
Here is a shrimp, and here is a shrimp peeler, and here is another shrimp peeler, and here is another shrimp peeler, and here is another shrimp peeler, and another shrimp peeler. You're going to see us all performing on the Shrimp Show today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Whenever you're going to cook shrimp the way we're going to do today, you want to be sure that they're extremely fresh, because shrimp are very perishable indeed. And if they have any odor of ammonia or iodine, they're just no good and no fun to eat. And if you don't live in an area where you can get live shrimp, live raw shrimp, you have to depend on canned shrimp and frozen shrimp. And if you happen to live in an area where you know you can't get fresh shrimp, don't be fooled by a supermarket display of raw, thawed shrimp, because they won't be fresh. Shrimp, if they're going to be fresh, should be frozen, and they should be kept solidly frozen until you are ready to cook them. And when you buy them, do not buy shrimp that are frozen in a solid block like that. They're just not nearly as good as shrimp that are frozen individually, which they can do now. They come in a package, and each shrimp has been frozen individually, and they mostly all come apart into separate pieces, and they have a much fresher taste. And you can get them either with the shell on, raw, or you can get them deveined and peeled raw. And you can cook them either way, but just be sure that when you buy them, get them in one of these bags and notice that they're loose in the bag. And just keep them that way. And then you're going to have very good tasting shrimp. And you can cook shrimp very simply by boiling them in salted water with herbs and spices, and you can find the recipe for that in any cookbook. Or you can cook them according to a marvelous French recipe, which we're going to do today, called Croustades de Crevettes à la Nantua. And it's a very typically French recipe because they use absolutely every part of the shrimp, and there's not one thing that's wasted. And it's absolutely delicious. And I thought that as long as shrimp are easy to cook, you'd like to see a way that wasn't so terribly easy but is unusual. And these cook in what is known as a mirepoix, M-I-R-E-P-O-I-X. And what this is aromatic vegetables, or carrots, onions, and celery, cut into strips and then cut into very small dice. I'm just doing a token of you, just because we've done so much cutting. You'll just cut everything into strips and then gather the strips together and cut them into dice. And we're going to want, for 2 pounds of shrimp, we're going to want about 1½ cups of diced onions, carrots, and celery, and then cook it very slowly in butter until it is soft and looks just like this. And then you have your mirepoix, and it's such a useful thing to have because you can use it for cooking fish or chicken. As long as you're making it, you might as well make quite a bit, and then you can keep it in the freezer and always use it. And the mirepoix comes from, it was named by a chef for the Duc de Levis-Mirepoix, Maréchal de France and ambassador under Louis XV, and he had a wonderful kitchen, and so he had things named after him. He didn't do the cooking himself at all. He just provided the wherewithal for the cook to do wonderful things. And this starts out with the shrimp, which are cooked in butter and the mirepoix. I'm going to put in about, 2 or 3 good tablespoons of butter, and I'm using one of these high-sided frying pans called a chicken fryer. And we're going to use 1 pound of shrimp, and so we want about 3 tablespoons or 4 tablespoons of our cooked mirepoix. And then the shrimp go in, and you can cook these either with the shell or not with the shell. But you're going to have the best flavor, and it's going to be the most French if you cook them with the shell. Now, these are the frozen raw shrimp, and they're still frozen hard, and they go right into the pan. And the reason that these are going to be cooked in the shell is because the shell gives a lot more color. They're going to turn pink in the butter, and we're going to toss them in the butter for 2 or 3 minutes with a little salt and pepper and some herbs. I'm not going to cook them as long as they should be because I just want you to see how it's done. But you put a little pepper on, and I'm going to put a little thyme on. You could use tarragon if you want. I'm using about, 1/4 of a teaspoon. And then a bit of salt. And then these you just toss them over moderately high heat until the shells turn pink, and that's 2 or 3 minutes, and just toss them. Once in a while with these shrimp, even if they are individually frozen, they stick together a little bit, and just take them apart with a knife. And you'll notice as you cook them, this lovely pink color starts forming over the shell, and that also gives the shrimp themselves a lovely pink color. And you don't want to cook them too fast because you don't want the shells to burn, so just keep watching them. And then after they've turned pink, we're going to flame them in good French cognac. I'm going to put on about 1/4 cup of cognac there, and then light it. I'm doing this recipe whole hog, so you'll see exactly how it's supposed to be done. And then light a match and stand way away. There, they're flaming. And the object of the lighting the brandy is to burn off the alcohol, because you don't want to have a lot of just raw alcohol taste. And if you're not going to use good cognac, just don't use it at all, because it's simply terrible to go to all the trouble of making a great dish and then putting in a lot of bad stuff. So it's got to be good cognac or none. And then we're going to put in about 1/2 cup of dry white French vermouth. And then to give a little added color, we will put in a tomato. And these shrimp are going to cook this way, and then we're going to make a sauce out of all this juice, so we don't have to, what am I trying to say? We don't have to blanch the tomato, we just have to squeeze the juice out of it, because we don't want a lot of extra juice. So just squeeze out the juice. We're always squeezing juice out of tomatoes, but the juice doesn't have very much flavor, and you don't want to dilute your sauce with anything like water or tomato juice, because that's not the way to do things. And then we want to have some bay and a little thyme, or if you're using tarragon, you'd use that, and some parsley. That's going to take the whole pieces of parsley and put them on top there, and a little bit of thyme about. We've already had some thyme in the shrimp, but I'll put in just a little tiny pinch. And then this is to cook with a cover on it. And the shrimp defrost very quickly. And by the time that you've sauteed them, they've practically defrosted. Put the cover on, and then they're to cook very slowly at a slow boil for 5 to 7 minutes. And you can tell when they're done. Here's some that are already cooked. When you lift them up and you feel the shrimp, and the shrimp doesn't feel squashy as though it were raw. And then you let them cool in the liquid, and this is an important part of it, because they must cool in the liquid so that they will pick up all the lovely flavor of the herbs and the wine. Then after they've cooled about, say, 20 minutes, just dip them out. Turn off that heat. And then you have all of this beautiful liquid in here. And this, see, all of this lovely flavorful liquid you're going to use for your sauce. So you carefully save that, and we're going to do something else with it. I want to be sure that that's not boiling. And now the shrimp are all cooked, but they're still in their peel, so we have to peel them. As you can see, this goes into much more complicated business than just an ordinary shrimp dish. And now there are many ways to peel a shrimp. I got a selection of peelers. You have this one here, which is a hook effect, and on one side of it, it's angular, and this side is sharp, and the other side is curved. Then there's some little teeth and a sharp point. And the object of this is that you take your shrimp and take the big end, which was where its head was, and poke this thing up through underneath the shell, and these teeth open up the back of the shrimp, in case there's a little dark vein, the vein is then opened up and you can scrape it out. In this case, there's a little bit, and you can just scrape it out with the point of your knife. And then we have other shrimp peelers. There's this one, which is a piece of aluminum with some teeth on it. And this is really meant for raw shrimp, because some people like to peel their shrimp before they cook them. And this has some ratchets underneath and some teeth, and you stick it again through the big end, and that rips the skin off and also opens up the vein in case you want to clean the vein out. And then we have this other that looks like sort of an animal, and that again is used for raw shrimp. And you stick it through, and it has a ratchet point, and you stick it all the way through the shrimp. And then it comes out the other end, and then you squeeze the handle, and the shrimp comes out of the shell, and you have your little dark vein there, which you can then remove. And then you have the plain old finger technique, which I think is just as easy as anything, by just peeling it from the underneath part and just pulling all the shell off. But you can peel the shrimp any way you like, as long as you get the peel off. But then you come to another very French part, which is you have all of this shrimp peel, and you still have a tremendous amount of flavor in that. And so if you're going to be very French, you don't waste that. You can make a shrimp butter out of it. And also, if you were buying French or fresh shrimp, you would have the head on. You see that all that we're getting is the tail down here, but you have all this head and some more feet, and that has a lot of meat and flavor in it. And so if you have fresh shrimp, save the heads too, and then when you peel them, put all the heads into your peelings. But as long as we have headless shrimp. If you're going to make shrimp butter, you can just add some whole unpeeled shrimp. And then you're going to make the shrimp butter, we're going to do it two ways. The first is the French way. And this is a marble mortar here, and here's a great big wooden pestle. And the idea is to pound the shrimp with some butter. And if you take an equal amount of shrimp and an equal amount of butter, and just put the butter into the mortar, and then put your shrimp peelings in. And then, this is used when you had a great big restaurant or an old house, and you were the chef, and you had a lot of little boys called commis. And you'd say, boys, I want you to pound up the shrimp. So they'd get to the big mortar, and pound, pound, and pound, and pound. And in about 20 minutes, you'd come back, and they'd say, Chef, I think these shrimp are all right. And you'd say, oh, no. Pound some more. And so you'd pound for about half an hour. And then after you've pounded, you see, you've pounded the shrimp and the butter, and by this very hard pounding, you're also pounding all the flavor of the shrimp into the butter. And you're going to get an absolutely delicious mixture with this. And you can use this, if you can find one of these. We found one of these mortars in the flea market about 5 miles from the entrance, and it weighs a ton, and my husband had to carry it all the way to the car. But it's wonderful for pounding up lobster shells and crab shells. And you're going to see what this is going to what this is going to be like. Now, but we're not even half through now. You scrape off your mortar, and then you have a little scraper, which is called une corne, which used to be made out of a piece of horn. And then you put it into another French contraption, which is called a tamis, which is a wooden drum. I've got this upside down, but it doesn't make any difference. And then you take a pestle, and you have your little boys pound through here. And this takes another 20 or 30 minutes, but you're pounding it through a sieve so that you can leave behind all of the shrimp shells. And then you get out of it, you get out all the butter you put in, plus all the shrimp meat and flavor. And this is an absolutely delicious mixture, and you can use it for sandwiches or all kinds of things. Now, I haven't got anything to put it in, but I thought you'd like to see this method. Then you can do a more modern method in the electric blender. You fill your blender with very hot water, and I'll show you why in a moment. Then you want to get some very hot butter. Put this on the blender, and you heat up some butter, about, again, an equal amount of butter and your shrimp mixture. And then you put your shrimp in with their shell into the blender, and then you pour your very hot butter in, and then you put the top on and let her go. Now, the reason that you want this to be hot, because if it weren't hot, you would find that after you put the shrimp in, the butter would cream up. And then, what I'm supposed to do here is to put this through a sieve first. I'm going backwards here. There. You put this through the sieve, and then you push it through the sieve. Then just use a rubber spatula or spoon and push this mixture through, and then you still have your shells which have remained in the sieve. I think actually a wooden spoon is better. But you have in this the most delicious flavor, particularly if you've cooked your shrimp in the Nantua manner. And so now you can see why it's worthwhile to save all the shells. Now, if you happen to have shrimp that aren't in shells, or you want to make a shrimp butter fast, you could just put in whole cooked shrimp and having sauteed them in a little bit of butter. And then we have two types of butter, and you still have these shells, and they still have flavor. And as you remember, we had the stock that we cooked our shrimp in, so we're just going to keep that, let that simmer. We could put in a little tiny bit more of vermouth, because I think we could have a little bit more in. We'll just let that simmer for 20 minutes, and then that gets strained again. And then you have the liquid for your sauce. And so no wonder, really, that, people rave about French cooking when they will take all of this trouble to make a sauce. And so now we're going to make the Nantua sauce. And this starts out with, we have 2 cups of shrimp, so we want about 1.5 cups of sauce. So we will have, I've got my spoon awfully hot there. We want 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm going to turn a little bit of this heat off. I'm burning up. And we want 2 tablespoons of flour. And that's to cook together to make our familiar roux of flour and butter cooked together, which is going to be the basis of our sauce, or the thickening element. And as always, this is to be cooked until it foams and froths together for about 2 minutes. I'm not cooking it as long as I should because I don't want you to sit around watching me stir for 2 minutes. But remember to cook it 2 minutes without coloring, then take it off the heat, and then we have our beautiful liquid here. And this gets, after the roux has cooled off, the liquid gets strained right into it. You see, there's the debris left over, and if you've simmered that for 5 or 10 minutes, you just have a stock that is absolutely heavenly. And now, this is with the flour and butter roux and the shrimp stock. This is our dear old friend, the velouté. We had about a cup of our shrimp stock there, and if you don't have quite that much, you can add a little more milk to it. And then that comes over heat and is brought to the boil. And what you want is 1 cup of fairly thick sauce, because we're going to enrich it further. As you see, these sauces are all terribly quickly made, because once you have cooked your flour in your butter, you're not going to have a nasty floury taste. And now, we're going to turn our velouté into something else, even richer and finer. We're going to put in an egg yolk and a bit of cream. And as usual, whenever we're going to enrich anything with an egg yolk, you always have to put in some cold liquid. There's a little bit of cream. Blend that up well, and then pour in a little bit of your hot sauce. And all of this is so that you're going to heat your egg yolks gently, because egg yolks are such delicate creatures that you have to heat them very gently. And then set that, and then we have peeled shrimp over here, about 2 cups of the shrimp, and the shrimp go in. And this is now shrimp in a sauce parisienne, and you can do this ahead of time if you want, and then, or we want to let it heat up just a little tiny bit, and then you're really all ready to serve. But you have the problem of what you're going to serve this lovely dish in. You can serve it in a patty shell, or in a rice ring, or in a tart shell, and we're going to serve it in a croustade, which looks like this, which comes from really a crust of bread, and that's all it is. It's made out of a whole unsliced white bread, and you just cut it into a piece and cut the crusts off. Then you can make them any size that you want, from 25 feet to 2 inches. And this is just the size that will be for 1 serving. And then take a knife and cut an edge out about 3/8 of an inch, and then just scoop out that inside section. And if you have a little grapefruit knife, this is sometimes easier to scrape it out with. Just scrape it like that. And then take your fingers and poke it all down and press it on the sides. Now this should be stale white bread, and make sure that you have white bread with body, not that squishy, squashy bread. If you could make homemade white bread, it would be even better. And then, after you've made this, you take some melted butter and you just paint it all over with melted butter. And don't use anything with butter. Don't use that so-called, whatever it's called, spread. Because if you're not going to use butter, you're not going to have what you should have when you've gone to all this trouble with your croustades and your shrimp and your lovely sauce. You have to have exactly the right taste. And now, after you have painted all of your croustades, you put them in the 450-degree oven in the upper third and bake them for 5 to 6 minutes. And after they're baked, you can take them out, and then just before you serve, you can put them in a warming oven to heat up for 2 or 3 minutes so that they're hot. And then you are now ready to turn your shrimp into a Nantua. And that's what you use this lovely shrimp butter for. Put in about 2 tablespoons and be sure that you only turn it into a Nantua at the last minute, because the butter is rather like a hollandaise. You cannot now reheat your shrimp. And then be sure that you taste it very, very carefully for seasoning. It's awfully good. Well, let's put in a little more butter, I think. This, you can go on, you could treat this just like a hollandaise base and put in just as much butter as you want. And naturally, if you're going to go to all this enrichment, you would use this, say if you're using it for a first course, you would serve something very simple afterwards. And then just before you serve and just after you've put in your shrimp butter, you will fill your croustades. If you were serving this as a main course, you give each people 2 croustades of this size. These are about 3 inches. I'll put a little bit more in. But this is really one of the best sauces you can imagine. There's one shrimp that fell off. Right back in the pan. And then this is one reason you wear a towel if you've made any spillies. You just wipe that up with a towel so that everything looks nice and neat. And then if you're really feeling fancy, you could sprinkle this with chopped truffle. Or you can just simply use chopped fresh parsley. That really is very good. So we're now ready to serve. So here are our croustades à la Nantua. And these will go, you could serve these as the main course for a supper, or the first course for a fancy dinner, or for a nice little luncheon. And if you're serving it as a main course, you could serve a salad with it, a nice mixed green salad. And you should have an extremely good white wine. I would suggest a white Burgundy, like a Meursault, well chilled. And you want to be sure in any case that you have a wine that has a certain amount of body, because if you have a light, dry white wine with this delicious rich sauce, the wine wouldn't complement the dish. It would taste rather sour, and you would be very disappointed in the wine. And again, if you wanted to serve this as a main course, you could put this in a rice ring, which would be very pretty, and then serve with it some buttered peas. And when you eat it, you just cut right down through this lovely hot buttery croustade. Now this is really haute cuisine, and haute cuisine means it's a bit more work than regular everyday cuisine. But it is a perfect example of very good French cooking. It's very much like a little French seamstress who can make a wedding dress out of a pillowcase. And so here is croustade à la Nantua. And that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.